everyone. I'm Professor Bartinique, and today I want to talk a little bit about Shakespeare, one of my favorite topics, but literature, looking at it through the point of view of theater. Usually, when we study literature, you can pretty much predict what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about plot, we're going to talk about characters, theme, setting, use of language, point of view, all the things usually involved in a narrative or some kind of a story. And this works for novels, short stories, narrative poetry, because in that situation, the author's intent is for you to sit down, open a book, read it, and interact with the words on the page and respond to the text. However, when we study Shakespeare, unless we're studying the poems or the sonnets, we are studying the plays. And this is a whole different ball game. There's many other things that it's always a good idea to consider, even though you're going to look at all the stuff you would look at for literature. Think of the text of a play as a piece of music for a minute. If you see a piece of music, you see a sheet of paper and you see spots and circles and stuff on the page, but that's not the song, that's not the piece of music. It doesn't become the music until somebody performs it. Someone sings the song, someone plays the piece on the piano, or somebody plays on the guitar, or a symphony orchestra plays it, but somebody has to take those notes and apply them to the medium in which they're supposed to exist in. So it doesn't come alive until the musician does something with it. Same thing happens with the text of the play. Text of the play is not the finished product. No matter what the time period is, we can study plays and analyze them and critique them as literature and all of that, but it's not the final version. So think of the text of a play the same way you would think of a piece of music. First of all, it's incomplete. So to wrap one's head around it a little bit, there's lots of considerations. Theater, and we'll talk a little bit more about theater in a bit, plays are collaborative. Doesn't matter what the time period is, if it's ancient Greece, or if it's something that's going to open on Broadway, or something in regional theater. Plays are collaborative. Lots and lots of people are involved. The playwright is the one who provides the text. We call it the script. That's all it is. It's words and information to help everyone else put the play together. You need actors, you need a director, you need costume designers. All this applies to Shakespeare, folks. Sets. Shakespeare didn't have sets, but he had stuff that got put on the stage. Props. Sometimes there's music. Sometimes there's sound effects. Lighting doesn't refer to many of the Shakespeare plays, but nowadays there's lighting, and in modern theater, there's electronics, computer-generated graphics, music, sound effects, all sorts of stuff. So the word theater has a lot of meanings. If I say I'm going to the theater tonight, it means I'm going to see a play. It also means just the whole concept of theater, everything that's involved in theater. It also means a building. Playwrights of any time period write for that time period. They write for a particular building, a space that's going to accommodate their play, their show, and what can be acted in that space. Shakespeare is part of professional theater. Theater in England wasn't always professional. It evolved over several hundred years. It started in the church, just as little enactments of religious scenes. It then moved outside to the front of the church. And again, the scenes would get more elaborate. And then through the Middle Ages, the scenes would be either put in various places in front of buildings in the town, and you would see they were all religious. You would see various scenes from the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the audience would move from spot to spot, or they put the scenes on carts, and the audience would stay in one place, and you'd pull the carts through the town, and they would see the different, they'd see Noah's flood, they'd see David and Goliath, they'd see the nativity scene. You would see different scenes. But as it got more elaborate and more, and it was the regular people who did it. Very often it was the people in the craft guilds who would be responsible for the different kinds of scenes that would be done. It became more and more elaborate, and by the time we get to Shakespeare's time, we have professional theater. We have buildings. People paid admission. The other thing that happened was, and there were acting companies. They had royal patrons who also helped to foot the bill. We have as many plays of Shakespeare as we have because of not that many. Shakespeare died in 1616. In 1623, two members of his acting company, Hemmings and Condell, published the plays in the First Folio. And that looked like this. This is the title page of the First Folio. Folio means a big sheet of paper, bigger than this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. It's a big sheet of paper. It would be this size. The book opened. You fold it in half and you get 4 pages. So this is the title page, and opposite the title page is a poem by Ben Jonson, another playwright and poet of the time period, to the reader about Shakespeare. This is what the print looked like. I know it's a little bit hard to see. It doesn't all look like our modern letters, but this is early modern English. Don't anyone ever say again, Shakespeare writes in that Old English stuff. If you look at this top section here, this is that Old English stuff. This is Old English from around 1000, Common Era, Fader, okay, you kind of recognize that as father, who are in, that looks going to turn into heaven. This is Old English. English has evolved. It went from Old English, then after 1066, when the Norman conquest happened, the French invaded and took over the English throne, and French became the language of the upper class of the monarchy. For several hundred years, you began to make a mix of English and French. English to this day is 25%, 26% French origin words, by the way. But it starts to look a little bit more recognizable. This is the kind of language Chaucer would have written in. And on the bottom here is the Our Father from the King James Version of the Bible in 1611, printed in modern type, all right? But now you could read this. This is not a problem. So never again say to anybody, oh, Shakespeare writes in that Old English stuff. No, he doesn't. He writes in early modern English. So, Shakespeare's building. More pictures. In 1996, the reconstructed Globe Theater, that was Shakespeare's theater that existed from about 1599 to the end of his career, existed on the south banks of the Thames River. It's professional theater. In 1996 in England, and it still exists today, and if we ever get out of uh, all the various restrictions we have, they'll be doing shows again here. They do shows in it. Is what the as close as they can come to what the Globe Theater looked like. Prior to the Globe, Shakespeare performed in another theater called the Theater. Anyhow, you can see it's open air. You have a roof over part of it, over the part of the stage, over some of the seating area. This comes around. They called it a wooden O. Think of a circle. But this is what the stage looked like. It was a platform. It had three entrances to the stage. A door on the far side, and this curtained off area in the middle. All right. This is what the empty stage looked like. So if you needed like a bench, a piece of furniture, you shoved it on. Got to pick up another picture for you. This is again in modern day, a picture from the Globe Theater itself, a modern day representation. See how you would have the people standing right at the edge of the stage. These were the cheap seats. Today we call it the orchestra, but these were the cheap seats. You paid a penny and you could get in here. If you wanted to sit on a higher level, you had to pay a little bit more. If you wanted to sit and be seen, you paid much more money to sit in these seats right off the stage. So literally you've got lots of seats right off the stage. The audience standing in front of the stage were called the groundlings. These other seats, even in this reconstruction, they're just benches. They're not chairs like you would think of as regular theater seats. And you can see it's daylight. For the reconstructed Globe, they do have lights, by the way. But in Shakespeare's time, plays were done during the day because you didn't have lighting. It's why in the plays they're always telling you what time of day it is. When Hamlet opens, you're told it's dark, it's cold, because you're doing it in broad daylight, right? You're on a platform. You're on a plain platform. You don't know where you are unless the lines tell you where you are. All the information's in the lines. This is the Forest of Arden. Tells you if you're on the battlements. You have to know where you are. The lines have to tell you. By the way, in Romeo and Juliet, this was the balcony. Right? This curtained off area where this little person is standing would have been the tomb in Romeo and Juliet. It was like a mausoleum, a tomb. In Hamlet, and I don't see markings on this stage, but it may be just the image, there was also a trap door in the middle. So, for instance, in Hamlet, where they're burying Ophelia, you would have the trap door open, and you could lower something below the stage. These are all the kinds of conventions of the theater conventions, an agreed upon way of doing something. These are all the conventions of the theater Shakespeare was writing for. This is what he knew. This is what he had to work with. So when you're, again, reading a play, don't be saying, well, it should be some other way, because lots of times what you're reading is all Shakespeare had to work with. The amazing thing is what he did with it. Some other things to know about Shakespeare's theater and the conventions. Again, conventions, not going to a meeting, but conventions, it's a crazy part of the English language, what we mean by an agreed upon way of doing things. Until COVID, when you met somebody, you shook hands. Now you bump elbows or just say hello. But convention is an agreed upon way of doing things. Shakespeare's theater is what we call repertory theater, Repertory. Who are those wondering about it? It is the same actors doing every single show. Think of it the way you would think about a recurring show on television, where the same person is the male lead, the same person's the female lead. You have the assorted cast, and then on a TV show, sometimes you bring in other people. For Shakespeare, you had the same group of people, period. They were all men. No women on the English stage until 1660. We're talking about the 1590s and the first decade of the 1600s. All men. The same man, a man by the name of Richard Burbage, played all the male leads, whether it was Romeo, whether it was Hamlet, whether it was King Lear, whether it was Henry V, whoever it was, the same actor. Shakespeare was right, and Shakespeare's writing for these people. He's writing to their acting strengths. In the 1590s, Shakespeare's company was called the Lord Chamberlain's Men. The Lord Chamberlain was an official of the government who helped provide money for the plays, who helped support the plays. In 1603, after Queen Elizabeth died, and King James took over, Shakespeare's company became known as the King's Men. The king was the patron. That's why when you hear talk about Shakespeare's theater, you'll hear the term Elizabethan and Jacobean. It just refers to the two different decades. Elizabethan, well, Elizabeth was queen. Jacobean, after James I became king. So you have all the same actors. So it's a way to think about the acting and the strength Shakespeare is writing for. The female parts were played by not really boys, more like teenage boys. And remember, nutrition wasn't quite what it is nowadays. So young men's voices didn't change as young as as they do now. So the teenage boys would play the girls' parts. There's a whole lot to do about this in Hamlet in the player scene. Sometime you take a look at that. But anyway, they would play the female parts. Older teenage boys whose voices hadn't changed yet would play the more important women's parts. Ophelia, Juliet, Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing, Portia in The Merchant of Venice, Lady Macbeth, Cleopatra. Shakespeare's writing for this same group of actors. Shakespeare was not just a playwright, by the way. He was a partial owner of the company, but he also was an actor. The best we know is he played old men's parts. Maybe he played the ghost in Hamlet. He didn't have a lot of acting to do necessarily. He certainly didn't play King Lear. That would have been Richard Burbage. But he had to act because he was also the playwright and take care of what the show looked like. To give an example of how Shakespeare's writing changed based on the actor. In the 1590s, a man by the name of Will Kemp, K-E-M-P, had the clown parts. He played kind of country bumpkin sometimes, more slapstick, fall over your feet, mix up your words type of characters. He would have played a character like Dogberry in Much Ado, or Peter in Romeo and Juliet, the nurse's attendant who's always running around making mistakes. He was known for physical comedy, for dancing, for jigs, for fun stuff. He left the company around 1599. In 1600, they got a new clown actor to play the clown parts. His name was Robert Armin, A-R-M-I-N. He's a musician. He's more the court jester type. And it's from sort of 1599, 1600 on that you get court jester parts. In the same time of period as Hamlet, you get Festi in Twelfth Night. It doesn't always have to be a court jester in the traditional way you imagine one, in the costume and the little thing they hold with the clown on top of it and making jingly noises. He would have played the fool in King Lear, probably the first grave digger in Hamlet, because he was a musician, lots of verbal ability back and forth. They called it wit, and really sharp in terms of his answers. Hamlet makes a big deal about that at the first part of Hamlet in Act 5, Scene 1. Um, as I said, the older male teenagers would have played the women's parts. Shakespeare must have had a really talented young man for Juliet, because if you take a really careful look at Romeo and Juliet, which many of you read in high school, she really, what they say, carries the play. You have to have a good Juliet or you're going to have a real mess on your hands. And remember, this is a part that goes from a little girl, a young teenager, not quite 14 years old, get married? I never thought about getting married. In the first part of the play, to she's still 13, 2 weeks shy of her 14th birthday, but to a woman at the end of the play where she's been divested of everybody who she could depend on. Romeo's in exile. The nurse has essentially abandoned her. Um, and before she takes the sleeping potion, the first line of her soliloquy is, "My dismal scene, I needs must act alone." You go in 4 acts from someone who's a youngster who's saying, "Yes, Mom, I'll do what you tell me," to having to make all sorts of decisions on her own. So, anyway, delivery, the lines would have been delivered much quicker even than we think of today. You know, Hamlet says to the players, "Speak the speech, I pray you, trippingly on the tongue, but do not soar the air too much. Don't be gesturing all over the place. Keep it calm, but speak quickly." The plays are divided into 5 acts, and the acts are divided into sections called scenes. Other conventions that you would look at, but you always have to think about this as being in the mouths of actors, are soliloquies, which are solo speeches. The character is on stage by him or herself, and it's the way to see into the character's head. In a modern movie or even a TV show, you might just see the character sitting down or standing or something, and you would hear a voiceover. You would hear the actor's voice, but you wouldn't see the mouth moving. In a soliloquy, of course, the mouth is moving. There's something called an aside, and they will be marked in the text, even in Shakespeare's time. And it's like when somebody says something you don't like and you make a comment, but under your breath. Nobody else is supposed to hear it, but it's just something you say. Of course, on stage, you have to stage it and set it up in such a way that the audience can hear it. A couple other things, the plays, always hear about poetry. It's written in blank verse. You can look that up. Google is a great friend for things like that. But there's also lots of prose. And as Shakespeare, his earlier plays are heavily poetic. As you get to the greater plays, the 4 big tragedies, Hamlet, Othello, Lear, Macbeth, you have lots of important speeches that are in prose as well as in poetry. So Shakespeare's script, the text, contains almost all the information needed by everyone putting on the play. The plays did have some very basic stage directions, which means information telling you what to do, trumpet sounds, uh, cannon goes off, entrances and exits, sound effects, including the storms, including things like storms. Now, this is going to be a little hard to see. The Tempest begins with a storm. I know this doesn't come up as clearly as I would have liked it to. I played with it. But it says a tremendous something of thunder and lightning enters ship's master, and that's supposed to be bosun. They use that long S sometimes. This is a page from the First Folio. The First Folio was divided. The Tempest was the first play, and then it was divided into comedies, tragedies, and history plays. But anyway, you would have had some sound directions. You have the scenes marked off. You have the tags. I'll show you this later a little bit easier. Here it says, enter mariner. Here's another entrance. Here's another entrance. There's exits. I don't know if, so you see exit, exit, enter. And then here comes the second scene. So things like that were indicated, but not like in modern plays. In modern plays, just because I have to say it, people will talk about theater, identify modern theater beginning in 1860. I know that doesn't sound real modern, with Henrik Ibsen's A Dollhouse, the Scandinavian composer. And he started writing a lot of stage directions. Up till then, it didn't. All this stuff you see in italics, this is from A Dollhouse. All the stuff you see in italics are stage directions. It tells you what the set looks like. A room furnished comfortably and tastefully, but not extravagantly. At the back door to the right. When you see directions in a play, right, left, it means the actor's right and left, not the audience's. If you see upstage, it means to the back of the stage. Downstage means towards the audience. Okay? At the back, a door to the right leads to the entrance hall. Another leads to Helmar's study. It describes some of the stuff that's in the set. A bell rings. These are the tags, the names of the characters speaking. And sometimes you'll get stage directions following that. Sometimes you'll get a stage direction in a modern script that says, for instance, how the actor should be delivering the line, or some stage business, some activity on stage, what the actor should be doing. This is a modern script. I mean, it's a contemporary version online of A Dollhouse. In Shakespeare, everything except those minor things are in the lines. So when you're reading a play, try to keep in mind who's talking, what are they saying. But not only that, try to imagine the line being said out loud. How might the line be said? Is the actor moving or standing still? Actors stand still a lot more than you think. Is the actor handling a prop? A prop is something an actor uses. I got a pencil here. You have people in the theater in Shakespeare's time, as in now, whose only job it is to make sure these props are available when they need to be. All right? What other information are you getting? Is it telling you time of day? What is it? Since you don't have those little italicized things that say how the actors to deliver the lines, think about what information emotionally you are getting about how the actor is feeling. If we took something famous like Hamlet's fourth soliloquy, the to be or not to be soliloquy, if we took that and searched out videos of a whole bunch of actors who played Hamlet, everybody would have a different way of delivering that one speech. The lines are the same, but the tone, the inflection of the voice, what's emphasized, how the actor gives you a mood, they're all different. Something interesting to look up sometime. Try to keep track of who's on stage at the same time. For instance, even though the court is on stage in the Act 1, Scene 2 of Hamlet, there's one person who's not there. It's Ophelia. If you ever see a production with the god Ophelia there, somebody misread the play. She's not on stage. For soliloquies, imagine the character on stage alone. The character will most likely be downstage, in other words, near the audience. Is the character sitting, standing, a combination of sitting or standing? Is the character moving around? What is the actor emphasizing? A couple of other things just to think about in, well, let me show you something first before we get to that. Hamlet's first entry. This is from an online edition of the play. It's from Act 1, Scene 2. A lot of online editions just give you the act and scene. Most printed text editions will give you line numbers. So, for instance, what I have here, oh, I looked this up, I'm not making it up. This line, which is said by the king, by Claudius, but now my cousin Hamlet and my son, in the Folger edition of the play is line 66. In the Bevington edition of the play, it's 64. And the line numbers are usually down the side of the text. And how some text, when you're reading it, numbers lines every 5 lines, no matter what. Others, like the Bevington especially, gives you line numbers when there's a note telling you something about the line or the meaning of a word. So sometimes you'll have a whole page with line numbers, and sometimes it'll have a page with 64 and then 80 down here. But look at Hamlet's first entrance. This is an aside. When Claudius greets him, it's like Hamlet saying under his breath, a little more than kin and less than kind. He's not too happy with good old Claudius. In Shakespeare's time, there were no period costumes. It was just fancy Elizabethan dress. Often colors meant something. There's a big joke about the color, about yellow stockings. The For a man, and I don't mean like hose like a women wore, but the stockings a man would wear when the pants would come down to right below the knee, and there'd be a stocking from from the foot up to the knee. And there's a whole joke about yellow stockings. Hamlet is wearing black. Why do we know that? The play says it, at least at the beginning of the play. They wore fancy Elizabethan dress. So if you're reading Julius Caesar and thinking about it in Shakespeare's time, they were not running around in togas. They were running around, they were wearing just standard fancy Elizabethan dress. Okay? So try to also imagine the interaction of the characters. Is a line being delivered directly to a character? How is it being physically put on a stage? Is something that's always an issue. Okay? So anyway, this is only touching the high points. It's a play. When you are dealing with a script, you're dealing with the text. No matter whether it's a modern play where you have, and in modern plays, for goodness sakes, read the stage directions because you get a lot of information that way. But in Shakespeare, everything, characterization, setting, time of day, all sorts of material is in the lines only. So in other words, when you're reading a Shakespeare play to understand it, to interpret it, to think about it. Try to imagine it as a living entity. It's living, it's active, it's not static. It's more than the words on a page. There's lots of people on stage, then there's all the folks off stage, the stage manager who makes sure you're going to get on stage at the right time, the actors waiting for their cue, for the line they have to hear to know they have to enter the stage. Very often in a play, if it's something important, you'll say, with often in plays, things are repeated 3 times. You say you're going to, somebody says you're going to say it, and then you say you said it. Uh, you have the prop person who makes sure you've got that pencil or that sword or whatever you have to, or a book. You have to have the props. You'll have the person who is responsible in Shakespeare's time period for making sure that throne is out on stage on time, or there's a table, or there's a chair. You only have individual pieces of furniture. You never have a whole set like you could imagine seeing on a TV show or in some modern plays. There's the director who controls the whole thing. How you finally see and hear the play. The director is making the choices. In modern plays, you have a lighting designer. In Shakespeare's, you wouldn't. But you have, if there's thunder, I showed you the opening scene of The Tempest. If there's thunder, they had something called a thunder sheet. It's a big metal sheet that when you had to have thunder, you would shake it. All right. It's all there, everything. So there's people backstage making sure the show works as well as the actors on the stage. The script, which in literature, that's what you're going to be studying is the main focus, is really just the beginning of a play being a living entity. And it being a living entity is the whole intention. But in literature, we have added plays as something we study to understand the time period, to understand the characters, to understand the representation of what's going on, for an author to see how the author is presenting that information, those feelings, emphasize what character, what emotion, what message the play is trying to get out. Thank you very much. Hope this has helped a bit.
I'm going to add a quick question.
Sure.
What is your favorite Shakespeare play?
The one I've been talking about all the time, Hamlet.
Why Hamlet, though?
I like the main character. I like the way you can really get into the character's head. Maybe it's just me as a teacher. I think in many ways, Hamlet takes the modality of a type of play that was very popular in Shakespeare's time, not just tragedy, but revenge tragedy, where somebody a relative is killed, a father, a senior member of a family is killed, who comes back as a ghost to address a son or a nephew and says, "You must avenge my death." This makes all sorts of trouble for a Christian era play, which of course is Shakespeare's time period. Then the hero spends the 5 acts of an Elizabethan play back and forth with the villain, trying to work out the murder. Most Elizabethan revenge tragedies we would never do today because they are all blood and guts. We would end up laughing. But it was a really popular form of entertainment the way action movies are today. You have to move to the justification of a way for the hero to finally do in the villain, which usually happens at the very end of the play. Essentially, the whole cast assembled for some event. In Hamlet, it's the duel scene. Nobody would believe Hamlet. Hamlet can't say, "A ghost appeared to me and told me he was murdered by the king." Because by the time Hamlet opens, the play Claudius has everybody on his side. Hamlet's the great existential hero. He's all by himself. He has his one friend, Horatio, that he can talk to and tell some information to. It's not until that staged duel between Hamlet and Laertes in Act 5, Scene 2 at the end of Hamlet. It's Laertes who says, the king's to blame. Now the court has not heard it from Hamlet, they have heard it from Laertes. Gertrude has taken the poison cup, and she dies. Laertes and Claudius, the king, have been plotting against Hamlet. Claudius is using Laertes. Laertes is Ophelia's brother, and Ophelia has died from madness. And you always have madness in a revenge tragedy. But Shakespeare has but the way it works in a Christian context, it's that last scene in Hamlet is almost like a trial where you bring forth the evidence. You have to get the evidence about who killed, how King Hamlet died. You have to get it from somebody else. You can't get it from Hamlet. You have to get it from Laertes. Laertes and Hamlet exchange. Laertes kills Claudius. Hamlet's been wounded. Laertes has been wounded. They're both about to die. They exchange forgiveness with each other. And Laertes says, mine and my father's death comes not on thee. And Hamlet answers, nor mine on thee. But it sets up the Christian context that it's more like an appropriate execution than just killing somebody for the sake of killing it. And it's the internal study, the whole play with 7 soliloquies by Hamlet. You're watching his mind work, watching him sort everything out. And I think it's very accessible for that reason.